As we come to the end of 2022, the world is facing an epic crisis due to a confluence of factors: the war in Ukraine, fertilizer shortages, diesel shortages, drought, and a host of other issues. The world is simply not going to create the amount of food we've come to expect. Today, we're going to look at U.S. Department of Agriculture projections for global production, import, and export of the world's most important grains: corn, wheat, and rice. And when we look at those projections next to what we found in the most recent news articles of what's happening on the ground, I think they paint a dire picture for what is ahead. As we enter 2023, much of the world is going to be in a state of famine and starvation. Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. I wish that I had a more upbeat video today, but this is a very important video because much of the world remains unaware of the situation that we're about to face, that I think is going to unfold here in the next 1 to 4 months as we begin to harvest these grains, against a backdrop where we've been short of fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides. We've had supply chain issues with diesel, labor shortages, all sorts of factors coming into play that is probably going to lead to lower food production for 2022, and that's going to be the food that we eat into 2023. So today we're going to look at numbers from the USDA's World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report that came out on Friday. We're also going to look at those figures up against figures that I found in news articles. Now, when we go through this, don't take my word for anything here. I want you to do your own research. I'm going to put the links to the USDA's report as well as the news articles that I reference in the description so you can go check for yourself. Please leave comments below if you find other news sources that point to a different outcome. If you work in the agricultural industry, if you're a farmer, if you have firsthand knowledge of what's happening right now, please leave comments below. Let me know that. We'll probably do an update on this next month when the USDA's next report comes out, and we'll see where things stand at that point. So please leave your comments below. Please tell me I'm wrong. I've never wanted to be more wrong about what I think is going to happen than right now. So please, if you have that information, leave it in the comments below. Now, why am I pulling this information together? Really, it started as a curiosity a little bit over a week ago. I had been reading a news article and I ran across this one right here. And we're going to pull this up and look at this. This is from Times Now News. Now, as a bit of a backdrop, we know that following the war in Ukraine and some of these issues we were talking about before, there was already concern that wheat and corn exports would really be hit this year due to the war in Ukraine, primarily because they are such a major exporter of wheat and corn. Against that, I had been reading many articles saying we expect a record rice production crop this year. So that would help offset some of the corn and wheat lack of production, decrease in production. So then I run across this article about 10 days ago. Let's see. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I guess is when it was made. Maybe I found it 10 days ago, but it's from August 4th. It says, why India's possible low rice production sparks worries over global food crisis. And you can find this article link in the description, read it yourself in whole, but I just want to read this paragraph here. It says, there has been a 13% decline in paddy sowing so far in the monsoon season in India. Even though the rains have been sufficient, reports say that their distribution in time and space has been inconsistent. This has affected sowing in June and July, the peak months for planting the crop, which is fed by monsoon rains and is harvested in October, November. So keep in mind, come October, November, we're going to know what the reality is, how much rice was actually produced, because that's when the harvest is going to take place. So that piqued my curiosity, a 13% decline in sowing. So I went and I found this article. It's from the Daily Star, but it's really Reuters. It says global rice supplies at risk amid harsh weather. And again, you can go read this article, find the link in the description. But I want to point out the key parts. Here's one that stood out. It says patchy rains in India's grain belt, a heat wave in China, floods in Bangladesh, and quality downgrades in Vietnam could curb yields in 4 of the world's top 5 rice producers, farmers, traders, and analysts told Reuters. So 4 of the top 5 rice producers are experiencing issues that could affect their harvest. Then we read, India's top producing states have recorded a monsoon rainfall deficit of as much as 45% so far this season. Data from the state-run weather department shows. That has in part led to a 13% drop in rice planting this year. That's what we read in the last article. And then it says, which could result in production falling by 10 million tons or around 8% from last year. Now, why is that important? Well, an 8% decline, 10 million tons, to put that in perspective, India is the #1 exporter of rice in the world by far. They account for almost 40% of all rice exports. Last year, they exported 21.75 million tons. This article is telling us that their production could fall short by 10 million tons. Now, while there is some amount of rice in storage, I find it hard to believe that if this plays out, that India is going to export another 21.75 million tons rather than keep this extra 10 million tons for themselves and the 1 billion plus people they need to feed. So if this shortfall comes to fruition, then what we're going to likely see is an export ban from India at the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, you're probably seeing a lot less exports, probably a huge decline. So we're going to see. So what I've done here for the leading into that is we're going to look at this presentation, I guess you could call it, that I've put together. I've gone out and I've looked at corn and wheat and rice. Who are the biggest producers? Who are the biggest importers? Who are the biggest exporters? So here we have a list of the top 10 producers of corn on the planet. Here's the link for where I got this. It's probably not the most up-to-date. This is 2020. I know we have more up-to-date figures, but the nations really haven't changed all that much. Now we're going to superimpose on that numbers from the USDA, as well as numbers that I've seen in different articles to try to get a picture of what is going to happen as we go through the rest of this year. So according to USDA estimates, they project a 5% decrease in corn production in the United States this year. Now, not sure where they get that number. That's a little bit worse than what I've found in articles. I've found anywhere from estimates of minus 4.6% to an increase of 3.5%. But where I think they're getting this number from is area planted. Corn is very fertilizer intensive. So I've read articles where farmers have switched from corn to soybeans because soybeans don't require that level of fertilizer. And so they may just be going on area planted and nothing else at this point, because certainly I haven't seen changes that you would expect given some of the drought and weather conditions we've seen from month to month in these reports. It seems to come in a large part the same stuff over and over again. But we see here China is expected to have a 0.5% decrease. Brazil is expected to increase. That's great. Argentina, they have as increasing production 3.8%. Now, from what I've read, they're expecting a 7.5% decrease. So that could be a big factor. Next, they project that Ukraine will have a 28.8% decrease. Now, while that sounds bad, Everything I've read is talking about 50%. And frankly, I think that's extremely optimistic. We have war conditions, an ongoing war in Ukraine. Even if the farm itself, some of these farms have caught on fire and burned, but even if that's not happening, even if the farms themselves aren't under assault, you have to look at the supply chain issues for diesel and seed and fertilizer. What are the roadways like? Because once you harvest the crop, you've got to get it away from the farm to a port. You've got to ship it out. I know they talked about this Turkey agreement between Russia and Ukraine, where they would allow grain shipments to leave Odessa and come through the Black Sea. So far, I've only read of a handful of ships even leaving. One of them docked in Syria, and it wasn't supposed to. The insurance on these ships is through the roof. So they would have to bring out somewhere around 1,000 ships over the next 2 months to actually bring that grain out. And so that's 15 or so a day. I haven't seen anything close to that traffic showing up in news reports. So, while production, I think the production is definitely off. Exports is really what we want to look at, because exports is how Ukraine feeds the world. So we're going to look at that in a minute. And we've got no USDA figures for India, so I've noted that wherever they don't give specific figures for a specific country. Slight increase in Mexico, increase in South Africa, that's great, but when you look at how much they're producing, same with Russia, a slight decrease, but the United States creates 25 times as much corn as Russia. So after you get through this top 4 to 6 for each of these grains, it's not making as big of a difference. In the EU, they have a massive drought. The USDA is projecting a 15.5% decrease across the European Union. So their projections for the year is global production will decline 3.3%. Now, keep in mind, if any of these numbers in these first few come in lower than they expect, that's really going to impact that top line number. Now, there are projections for global ending stocks. What is a global ending stock? Well, think about what you have in storage to start the year. You add what you produce, then you subtract what's consumed, and then you have what's left over for storage at the end of the year. That's your ending stocks. Their projection is basically no change. It's the slight 0.3% increase. So we'll say no change for that. So right now, their bottom line that they're looking at is a 3.3% decrease in corn production worldwide. Now, let's move on to corn exports. Here's a list of the top 15 corn exporting countries I found, and we did the same thing. We're going to put these numbers on there. Bottom line, USDA is projecting global exports will decline 7.4% year over year. In the EU, they're projecting a decline of 27.8%. The United States, 3%. In Argentina, they're projecting a 5.1% increase in exports. But the news articles I've read have pointed out a 7.5% production decrease, not export decrease. But if they're producing less, especially if we're entering a area where food supplies become really tight and you want to look after your population first, I find it hard to believe that they're going to produce that much less but export more. And I could be wrong, but time will tell. Ukraine, they're projecting a 49% decrease. Let's look at that the other way, because that sounds like a huge number, and it is. But what they're really saying is that 51% of the corn produced in Ukraine is going to make it out of the country and into the world where it's needed. And I think that that figure is way too high. We haven't seen any evidence on the ground to indicate that that's going to happen. Again, I hope I'm wrong. If you can point to an article or some sort of reference, please post it in the comments and let me know. Brazil is expected to have a 5.6% increase. I haven't seen anything contrary to that. As far as Romania, France, Hungary, those numbers are all included in the European Union numbers. But I've read articles where estimates for production in Romania were cut from 14 million tons to 8 million tons. So these are recent changes where the countries have come out and said, we don't think the harvest is going to be as big as we thought. I'm not sure that that's reflected in the USDA's overall number. Same in France. They have a generational drought. They're saying it could be the worst in 500 years in Europe. Some towns in France are completely out of water and they're having to truck it in. So against that backdrop, they're going to produce less. So less corn right now. News links I've seen say a 19% decrease. I would think that that's probably likely to go down rather than up based on the drought articles that we're seeing. Then we have no figures for a lot of these countries, a 15.6% increase in South Africa. That's great. But again, once we get down to these countries, we're looking at 1.6% of exports. So a 15% increase isn't going to make a huge dent in that. The key countries are these top four. These top four in the EU. And we're looking at, what if this number from USDA, the 3% decline in exports, is based off of that 5% decline in production, which is based solely on area planted and doesn't take into account the yields we'll see from the drought we've been having, from perhaps less fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide applications. We'll have to wait and see, but if that number comes in lower, it's going to have an even bigger effect on this because, 37% of total corn exports come out of the United States, so they're the big one to watch. Argentina is 17.6%. So if this number isn't the increase the USDA says it is, and it's the 7.5% decrease in production that the news links are saying, again, that's going to affect this bottom line number. But let's say that it is minus a decrease of 7.4% in corn exports. Well, here we had the top 15 countries importing corn and the same numbers. And the bottom line, USDA projects global imports will be 0.7% higher year over year. Now, I'm not sure how to account for these numbers. And again, please leave comments if you know how to do it. But they're saying that they expect 7.4% fewer exports, 0.7% more imports, a production decrease globally of 3.3%, but the ending stocks are going to be basically no change. So how is that? If you're producing less and people are exporting less and importing more, how do you end up with no change? How do you not dip into storage to do that? So I don't know where these numbers are coming from. But here, that number is based on this big number up here, 21.7% decrease in imports of corn to China. Why is that? Well, if you've been paying attention to the news that coming into this year, China had stockpiled corn and wheat and rice, a whole host of agricultural products, I believe because they knew that the war in Ukraine was going to take place. Perhaps they're thinking about an invasion of a neighboring country. But for whatever reason, they were concerned about the food supply chain, so they stockpiled grains in a massive way. So it makes sense that they would import less this year based on those stockpiles. However, what if this number turns out to be an 18% decrease or a 15% decrease? Where does the specific 21.7 come from? If that number is lower, if it's 18 or 15, that's going to make this import number overall go up by a big deal. You can read these other figures for yourself. So that's where we stand with corn. Again, these are the early projections and estimates. I think that we're going to turn out to see that those are lower, and that the situation for corn is that there are fewer exports, more demand for imports, massive more demand for imports in my opinion, especially with what's going on in Europe with the enormous drought that they have going on there right now. You're going to see huge demand for imports of corn. It's just not going to be there, and it's going to bid the price up. Then we go into wheat. So here's a list of the top 10 wheat producing countries, and we'll superimpose these USDA numbers here. What's the bottom line? They project no change in global production and ending stocks to decrease 3.26% year over year. Now, they are saying China will increase production 0.7%. In the news articles I've read, that seems to make sense. They're pointing to about a 1% increase. The EU has a projected 4.5% decrease. News links I've read are a little bit higher than that. I would think if this drought continues, that's going to get worse. Now, here's the key number that we need to watch going forward. Russia. So they have projected that Russia, which is the third largest producer, will increase production 17%. And that goes into this overall production number that says no change. The articles I've read show 7.9 to 8% increase. So that would, if that comes to fruition, while it's more, it's a lot less than the USDA is projecting. And that's going to just hammer this estimate. It's going to blow it up. And the most recent articles I've read are showing that Russia is coming out saying they may not expect the harvest that they originally expected. And so these numbers could go down even more, those projections. We'll have to wait and see. Same with the United States. USDA projects an 8.3% increase. News I've read shows that's about right. But what happens if, again, fertilizer applications weren't what we thought, or some of the recent weather issues we've had, the heat wave, the drought, if that impacts that, even if it's an increase, if it's a lower increase than what they project now, that's going to lead to lower production for the year. Canada, same thing. Canada, great, 61% increase. That would be wonderful. But the articles I'm reading, the lowest figure I've seen cited is 45.6%. The highest is 57%. So what sort of difference does that make? If all of these estimates are just a couple of percentage points lower, it has a huge impact over here, especially with these top producers. Like I said before, the top producers are bringing in the lion's share of production. And even if they aren't top exporters, they need to replace that food for their own population somehow, and they're going to do that by going into the open market. So let's look at wheat exporters. Here's the top 15 by country. And we'll go in here and we'll look at these USDA numbers. Now, bottom line, they're expecting that wheat exports will increase 2.9%, which again, I find kind of hard to believe. They're projecting a 27.3% increase in Russian exports. Again, the production, and I guess this was actually export estimates, not production estimates, that I saw were between 8 and 14. So the top line number I could find was half of what the USDA projects. Now, keep in mind, even if the USDA's projection turns out to be right, we're talking about Russia, right? So Russia, if they've massively increased their wheat supply in the middle of an overall shortfall among all the other leading producers, they've already made it clear that they will do business with those nations that are friendly to Russia. So any exports of Russian wheat in an environment of tight food markets where supply is short, that's going to come with strings attached to it. It's not just going to go free floating into the free market for anybody to bid for it. Russia's going to be giving it to the countries, those countries that promise them things. And of course, we saw that with the first ship that left Ukraine after the brokered deal went to Syria, where Russia has military forces and where they are propping up the Assad regime. So we can't count on that. We've got to watch this Russia number for wheat very closely, because if it comes in lower, that's going to affect the global numbers. Same with the United States. Here they had Australia having a 9.1% decrease in exports. Based on the articles I've read, they're having drought there, and they were expecting a 12.7% decrease. Again, Canada, they had large projected increase in production. Makes sense they would have a large increase in projected exports, so that would be great. But what if that number turns out to be 60% or 50% instead of 73? That's going to affect this overall number. Ukraine, again, they have a 41.5% decrease in exports is their projection. Flip that over, guys. That's a 58.5% of actually getting the exports out. 58.5% of the wheat they exported last year, they believe is going to make it out of the country under the conditions that are on the ground right now. I hope so. I pray so, but I just don't see that happening. And so, as we get down into these other countries, we're looking at, Kazakhstan. USDA was reporting a decrease of 2.4%. Everything I've read is showing they're going to have a record harvest and that they're going to increase exports 15 to 25%. That's great, but they account for such a small percentage in the scheme of things. If all these other nations are having issues, the numbers aren't going to come together in a positive way. So they're projecting this wheat exports are going to be up 2.9% year over year. Again, I find that hard to believe, and I hope and pray that I'm wrong. As far as wheat imports by country, here's the top 15. We superimpose these same numbers. A lot of these don't have USDA figures, but they have a decline in imports for Indonesia, for China. Again, China is stockpiled grains, so that makes sense. Increase in Bangladesh, but by the time we get down here, we're looking at, marginal impact on imports. Still, they're projecting imports will increase 3.1%. So again, if the exports aren't there, just like with corn, you've got projected global imports being high. They're projecting an increase in the exports, so that's great, versus a decrease in exports for corn. But again, wheat is the one area that I thought was most in question, particularly because of Ukraine. So I find it really hard to believe that we're going to see some of these numbers actually play out. So now we're on to rice, and rice is what we began this with the articles that we went through. Here's the world's top 10 rice producing countries as of 2019. Again, the figures may not be the most up to date, but it gives us a good idea of who the top producers are, and then we put the figures on top. So we got the EU with a 21% decrease, but they're a minor producer of rice, so we can rule that out as relevant. USDA has no change in production for China, but the news links that I've read show that they're being hit by a heat wave and pest. So we want to keep our eye on that. If their rice production takes a hit, it's really going to affect what happens here. Now here's the big one. India, USDA projects a 0.9% decrease, but the article we just read at the beginning of this video is projecting an 8% decrease. That's a big difference right there for the second leading producer. So they have to feed their own people, plus they're the largest exporter. So if that turns out to be true, this number just goes out the window. And even with it, they're projecting global ending stocks will decrease year over year. And we look at the next countries. Bangladesh, USDA didn't provide figures, but we just read an article about floods in Bangladesh impacting them. Vietnam, they project an increase, but we just read about quality downgrades and other articles where they talk about high fertilizer costs impacting the yield. Same with Thailand. Thailand, they're projecting an increase, but I'm reading articles saying that the high cost of fertilizer is impacting yields there. So if these things play out, we're going to see these numbers change a lot over the next 1 to 4 months. And reality, certainly at the end of 4 months, we're going to know these figures for sure, what was produced and what wasn't. So let's look at exports. Here's our top exporters. And again, here's the big one. So they're projecting, the USDA, that India will increase exports 1.1%. But if they produce 8% less, that's 10 million tons. So that's 10 million of the 21.75 million tons that they exported last year. If they keep that at home to feed their people, which is what politicians do, then this becomes 11.75 million tons, which would be a 45.5% decrease from the number one exporter, who is responsible for 37.5% of rice exports globally. So if that happens, we're looking at 17% of all rice exports completely taken off the market. And that's assuming that there isn't, if we're in the middle of the global food crisis that I think is coming, I would expect all of these countries to simply ban exports. India has a lot of people to feed, and they are not going to want to deal with food riots in the streets so that they can export their food away to other countries. So we need to keep an eye on these. Lower yields are expected in Thailand and Pakistan, quality downgrades in Vietnam. In the US, we have a 5.3% projected decrease in rice production or exports. But from what I've read, the crop that's rated in good condition is down almost 15% over last year. So again, we'll have to keep an eye on those figures. What about imports? So again, they project that imports will decrease 1%. Well, why is that? Well, they've got a 1.6% increase in expected imports from China. So I would expect that that would help pick this number up. The only way I think they can get to this is through the Philippines having a decrease of 12.7% in exports. I don't know where that figure comes from. If you know, please leave a comment below and let me know where. Because every article I've read said they expect to increase imports. You know, they're having issues with fertilizer. You know, small farmers, they can't afford a quadrupling of the fertilizer price and still apply the same amount of fertilizer as they did before. Not stay in business, not make a profit. And so it's kind of hard to believe that we're going to see the same levels of production in some of these countries, and that, oh, well, they aren't going to need the imports that they needed a year ago. So, you know, maybe they have a massive storehouse of rice that I'm unaware of, but I don't think that's the case. So you change that changes a lot of this. Again, Bangladesh, they didn't provide a figure, but I read articles saying they expect an increase in imports. So guys, as we look at these numbers, you know, I think a key figure to look at it, we're going to watch these over the next few months, because we're going to know. We're going to know by December what happened and what didn't. And I hope that I'm wrong, and that in December, if so, I'll have a video and I will praise the Lord that I was wrong, and we will celebrate that there is no food crisis. But we need to be aware of this. So if we look at these countries that are the top importers of these grains, are there any that are top importers of all three? Well, yes, there are. So China and Japan are top 15 importers of corn, wheat, and rice. So they're going to be net importers trying to get a hold of this. Now, what's significant about that? Well, China is the world's #1 population, for one. There's a lot of people in Japan too. But these are top 5 economies. So they have the resources to go out and get this. So if there is a shortage and China is afraid they can't feed their people, if Japan is fearful they can't feed their people, they have the resources to go out in the open market, and whatever is available by export, they're going to buy it all up. They're going to buy it all up. And the same is true of these other countries we're going to look at, because we have the top importers of corn and wheat: Italy, Mexico, Egypt, Vietnam, South Korea. Top importers of wheat and rice, the Philippines and Bangladesh. Top importers of corn and rice, Iran and Malaysia. All of the countries on this list are in the top 40, 45 economies in the whole world. So they have the resources. Some of these countries may not have the resources that China does or Japan does, but they have the resources to go out there and pay what they have to pay to make sure that their food supply is taken care of. And so the question we need to ask is, what happens then? Because if we have this shortfall in production and exports that we see coming, and countries start cutting off exports, whatever is left is going to be vacuumed up by all these countries, the wealthiest countries. And the United States, the European Union, Canada, Australia, they're going to be in this mix too. People are going to be buying up what they can. So what that means is countries that are poor countries and net importers of agricultural products that have low per capita net income, they're going to be left out in the cold. They aren't going to be able to compete on the open market to get the imports of food that they need. So these are countries like the Central African Republic, Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Haiti, Afghanistan. The list goes on and on. There's dozens of these countries that already are facing borderline famine in a lot of parts of their countries and their population. And this type of scenario, if it plays out, is going to make it 10 times worse. It's going to make it a struggle, and we are going to see skyrocketing food prices. I know people think that they're up now, but they're going to go even higher no matter where you live in the world. They're going to go higher by the end of this year. And then we're going to see parts of the world that are in outright starvation, famine. I don't want to sugarcoat it or try to say about food insecurity. No, they're going to be starving because it's just not going to be there. And so, what can we do? What are the action steps that you need to take right now in preparation for this? Again, I hope I'm wrong, but you need to start putting aside food if you haven't done it already, because we've been talking about this in the past, but if you haven't done it already, set aside some extra canned food for yourself, for your family, for your neighbors, anybody that you want to help, for your local food bank, because they're in need of this too. Food inflation is hitting populations everywhere. Regardless of what country they live in, more people are visiting the food bank now than ever before. And fewer people who donate, there's fewer people left who can donate to the food bank because of food inflation. So they're getting hit by both sides on this. So we need to be thinking about how to prepare ourselves and our family, because if you're going to help others, you have to help yourself first. You have to be in a position to help others. So we want to be in a position where we can give to the local food bank, where we can give to our friends and neighbors. And then for these countries that are going to be left out in the cold, they're going to need you to be as strong as you can be and to come up with food and cash to give to charities. We need to start thinking about this ahead of time. How do we get food into those countries? The other thing we need to think about is, in Europe, you have this drought that's leading to crop failures. They're going to have some food issues, probably to a greater degree than they expect. And they're going to have refugees fleeing Africa and the Middle East coming there because they hear there's food. And so that's going to increase the demand for food in Europe. And that's going to happen in all parts of the world. If you've got one country that has access to food and one that doesn't, people are going to be pouring over the border. People will do anything to feed themselves and their families. So we have to take all of this into account and start thinking about what is the best way that you can serve those around you. Because I know we've been talking about, a very dire topic. Like I said, today wasn't an upbeat video. But I'm hoping that we can switch that around and turn it into an upbeat video. Because first of all, Jesus said that famine would be a sign of his return. So there would be famines before he returns. So if we see famine, It's yet another sign that Jesus is coming soon. But more importantly, let's look at what Jesus said. I want to turn to Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. This is your opportunity in the midst of this food crisis. If you don't live in one of the areas that's going to see food shortages, this is your opportunity right here. This is one of the best opportunities of your entire life. Here Jesus says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then these righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me.'" So think about that. If you feed somebody in the year ahead, somebody who is hungry and needs you, you feed them, it's as if you fed Jesus himself. So this is an opportunity. Prepare yourself now. Make yourself strong. Make sure that you have the food in reserve, that you have the resources in reserve to take care of yourself and your family, and then go out and find hungry people you can feed, because when you do that, you're feeding Jesus himself. So I hope that that helps leave this video with an upbeat, optimistic tone, guys, because we have every reason to be hopeful and full of joy, because Jesus Christ rose from the dead and he lives today and he's coming back. So guys, make sure to like this video, share this with other people. This is very important that this gets out and that people know what is coming. And God willing, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.